Tonight, is a ceasefire deal coming down the pike?
We have every expectation that if Hamas agrees to the proposal, that Israel would say yes.
But with tensions high, not all Israeli leaders agree.
It is a reckless deal.
Plus, 4 years out and lawmakers still want answers on the origins of COVID-19. Dr. Fauci takes the stand on Capitol Hill. And as Mexico elects its first female president,
you don't have to leave conviction to have compassion.
Thousands of American women minister to migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The Middle East at a crossroads tonight with the U.S. pushing a new ceasefire proposal in Gaza. Good evening from the CBN studio in Washington. I'm Caitlin Burke. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is signaling he's open to a temporary ceasefire to free hostages in Gaza. This as Israel announced 4 more hostages were killed in Hamas captivity. According to the Wall Street Journal, the current proposal allows Israel time to resume targeting Hamas if later negotiations for a permanent ceasefire crumble. During those future negotiations, Netanyahu has said he would insist on destroying the military and governing capabilities of Hamas, which is a non-starter for the terror group. Hamas wants written guarantees that Israel won't resume fighting, which isn't something Israel is willing to agree to.
We are working in countless ways to return our hostages. I think about them all the time, but in the process of this action, we maintained the goals of the war, chief among them the elimination of Hamas. We insist that we complete both this and that.
Netanyahu is facing pressure at home from Israelis who want a deal and also from leaders who want to continue the war. Israel's national security minister has even threatened to collapse the government if the prime minister agrees to a ceasefire. Here with us now is Victoria Coates, vice president of the Heritage Foundation's Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. She was also a deputy national security advisor under President Trump. Victoria, your thoughts on this latest ceasefire proposal?
Well, Caitlin, this is a little bit more realistic than what the president announced on Friday when he insisted that just because he was saying so, the war has to stop. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is absolutely correct. Israel has to find a way to finish off Hamas, because remember, in 2021, when we had the short 11-day Gaza war, the Biden administration pressured Israel into a quick ceasefire. And what did Hamas do? They went back and prepared for October 7th, 2023. So we can't stay in this cycle of violence. And I have to say I disagree a little bit with the reporting that Netanyahu's under pressure domestically to end the war. The polling I've seen shows that most Israelis either support the effort or think it hasn't gone far enough.
You mentioned President Biden's comments. What do you make of the president announcing what he said was an Israeli ceasefire proposal, only to later have Netanyahu seemingly contradict that?
Yeah, it was bizarre. For starters, the announcement was made in the afternoon on Friday in Washington, which means it was Shabbat in Israel, which means nobody in Israel would be watching television or able to answer the phone or respond until sundown on Saturday, their time. So a very strange time to make an announcement about Israel if that announcement is coordinated with the government of Israel. So it seems to me this was just President Biden trying to score some political points on a Friday afternoon. What he really wanted to talk about was the conviction of former President Donald Trump and take some pot shots at him. But it really seems to me, given President Trump's success in the Middle East, particularly in Israel, rather than criticizing him, he might have wanted to take a page out of his book.
If we're trying to avoid giving Hamas the opportunity to kind of gather themselves, do you see a way to secure the release of the remaining hostages before Israel has destroyed the terror organization?
This is where the administration's kind of soft on Hamas policy has been such a disaster. If the president had been clear from day one, from October 8th, when we realized the depth of the hostage crisis, when we realized that Americans were amongst them. And they still don't actually know how many Americans are still alive in Gaza, but there's some number around a half dozen. If the president had said, we are completely supportive of Israel unless or until you let all of these people out. Instead, they started to equivocate. They started to say, oh, my goodness, we're concerned about the hostages. If you look at the president's speech to Howard University, for example, he spends about 20 words on the hostages in Israel and about 70 words on the suffering of the people of Gaza. So clearly, Hamas thinks they have no reason to relinquish the hostages anymore. They can just keep dragging this out and demanding concessions from Israel. And this is a situation the president has created.
With this increasing criticism coming from Washington, what message are we sending to Hamas right now?
Right now, we're telling them they may as well just hang on. You have the president making no bones about it. He is advocating for a two-state solution. They are leaving the door open for Hamas to play a governing role in the future of Gaza. They are being very public in their criticism of the Israeli government, particularly personal in their criticism of the prime minister, and differentiating between the Israeli people and the duly elected government of Israel, saying we really shouldn't associate them. No, that's something you say about communist China, that we do not blame the Chinese people for the nature of their regime, not a vibrant democracy like Israel. And I think the Biden administration needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror and decide who are they going to back in the Middle East. You can't have it both ways after October 7th. You need to pick a side. And for them to be, veering toward the Palestinian side, given what Hamas has been doing since 1987, it's extraordinary to me that they would be leaning so far in the pro-Hamas camp rather than the pro-Israel camp.
All right, Victoria Coates with the Heritage Foundation, thanks so much for your time. Turning to Washington, Dr. Anthony Fauci in the hot seat today on Capitol Hill. The former White House chief medical advisor facing questions from House Republicans about the origins of COVID and the United States' response to the pandemic. CBN News senior correspondent Wendy Griffith has more.
Caitlin, Fauci's testimony before a House subcommittee marked his first public appearance on Capitol Hill since retiring in December 2022. He said the COVID lab leak theory is not a conspiracy and maintains that he kept an open mind about how it occurred.
During the hearing, House Democrats praised Dr. Fauci for saving countless lives during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I lost both of my parents during the pandemic. So I take this very personally. It's important to note that, if my opinion is that you are an American hero and your team has done more to save lives than all 435 members of this body on both sides of the aisle.
While recognizing aspects of his long service, some Republicans also criticized Dr. Fauci.
Business closures.
Early on, when 5,000 people were dying a day, yes.
Church closures.
Same thing.
School closures.
Again, the
stay-at-home orders.
These were important when we were trying to stop the tsunami of deaths that were occurring early on. How long you kept them going is debatable.
As to the theory that the virus escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, Fauci testified that can't be ruled out. He called allegations of his involvement in trying to cover up its origins completely false.
The accusation being circulated that I influenced these scientists to change their minds by bribing them with millions of dollars in grant money is absolutely false and simply preposterous.
Fauci did admit the vaccine was not as effective as they first thought.
The vaccine saved millions of lives, and I want to thank you for your support and engagement on that. However, despite statements to the contrary, it did not stop transmission of the virus.
That is a complicated issue because in the beginning, the first iteration of the vaccines did have an effect, not 100%, not a high effect. They did prevent infection and subsequently, obviously, transmission. However, it's important to point out something that we did not know early on that became evident as the months went by, is that the durability of protection against infection and hence transmission was relatively limited.
Yeah, it definitely had a positive effect for many people, especially those that were vulnerable. But we knew from the trials that people that got vaccinated still were subject to getting COVID. So was the COVID vaccine 100% effective?
I don't believe any vaccine is 100% effective.
Fauci also said more work needs to be done to prepare the U.S. for the next pandemic, including better communication between federal and local officials. Caitlin.
Thanks, Wendy. In other news, jury selection is underway in the federal gun case against President Biden's son, Hunter. He's charged in Delaware with 3 counts of buying a firearm while in the throes of a cocaine addiction. The president's son has pleaded not guilty and says he's being unfairly targeted by the Justice Department. Hunter Biden also faces a separate trial in California this September for allegedly failing to pay $1.4 million in taxes. Coming up, Women of Welcome. Meet the American Christians ministering at the southern border when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. In a historic victory, Mexico has elected its first female president. Claudia Sheinbaum is also the nation's first Jewish president. Her grandparents fled Bulgaria in the 1940s to escape the Holocaust. The former mayor of Mexico City was backed by outgoing President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Sheinbaum ran on a platform of fighting crime in one of the most violent election seasons Mexico has seen. She takes office December 1st. One of the biggest points of tension between the U.S. and Mexico is illegal immigration. President Biden is expected to sign an executive order Tuesday that would allow him to temporarily close the southern border and turn away asylum seekers when crossing surge. One group of Christian women sees the crisis from a spiritual perspective. CBN's Charlene Aaron brings us their story.
A new Lifeway study found that 91% of evangelicals favor immigration legislation that guarantees tighter borders. That same number also supports immigration measures that respect the God-given dignity of every person. The group Women of Welcome is doing just that, approaching the issue from a biblical stance, not a political one.
I've been working on the pro-life movement really for preborn lives and kids who are trapped in foster care or were awaiting forever families. And I was just challenged by a friend who worked really in the immigration space with World Relief to say, hey, does your pro-life agenda, does your pro-life biblical worldview extend to those across the border?
For Women of Welcome's Bree Stensrud, who leads a community of more than 13,000 evangelical Christian women, that answer was no. A trip to the U.S.-Mexico border in 2019 changed both her mind and heart.
I met with vulnerable mothers and migrant children who were also mothers themselves due to the violence that had happened to them in their countries. And they were seeking safety. They were seeking a different life. And that wasn't the narrative that I was hearing. It wasn't the narrative that my other friends in my conservative Christian circles were hearing either. And so it really grieved me because I thought if my girlfriends could see what I've seen on the other side of the border, they would be just as grieved too.
I would want to say to another mother who was seeking asylum that I'm so sorry. And also that you are doing a great job. And that all the little things you do for your kid, that all those little things matter.
It is a sentiment Stensrud believes other Christian women would likely openly share, were it not for partisan politics.
It's very hard to detangle and let yourself sit back a ways to take in the full picture. Because right now, each party is being fed a certain narrative about what should be happening along the border. We should be seeing what's happening at the border as an opportunity, a gospel opportunity, an eternity kingdom possibility.
That possibility turns into reality during her group's trips to the border. Opportunities to pray for migrants and Border Patrol agents abound, with officers seeking prayer for rising suicide rates among their ranks, safety concerns, and help with their families.
Every officer has always accepted our prayer, and we huddle them up in a circle, we lay our hands on them, and we thank them for showing up in some of the hardest parts of humanity and trying to affirm people's dignity as they are approached by them.
While Stensrud points out their work is not politically motivated, she admits disappointment that lawmakers have failed to make progress.
There are just, really some detractors that are showing up and persuading people otherwise. And Americans in general, but conservative Christians, they want a solution for vulnerable people showing up at our border and vulnerable people around the globe. We want to see people work together for the flourishing of people, no matter what party you're siding with on any given year.
Meanwhile, as the nation grapples with the issue, the Bible calls Stensrud and others to take the lead.
It doesn't mean that everybody gets into the U.S. We have to have thorough vetting, and the Lord is going to hold us accountable to how we treat the sojourner. You don't have to leave conviction to have compassion, and just come in and see what the Lord says in the whole arc of Scripture, and let that inform the ways that you show up politically to make a solution for thousands and thousands of people and Americans alike.
I was a stranger, and you invited me in.
There's the verse in 1 John 3.
I think as a church, I think our call is to get closer.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
She made history as the first female governor of Arkansas. Up next, Sarah Huckabee Sanders talks about her public policies and her personal fight against cancer. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders served as White House press secretary under former President Donald Trump. Now she's determined to help him win the White House again. She sat down with CBN's chief political analyst David Brody to talk about her plans to do just that.
The Arkansas state motto is "The people rule," and that's something Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders takes to heart.
How are you, David?
You're doing well.
Good to see you.
As President Trump's press secretary, she carried forth a "Make America Great Again" message. And now in Little Rock, Governor Sanders sees her immediate goal as more "Make common sense great again."
To me, it is absolutely insane, the things that are coming out of the Biden administration.
Part of that reaction is due to federal changes to Title IX that now includes gender identity as part of what is considered sex discrimination. Governor Sanders says she won't enforce it, even if it means losing out funding for sports and other activities.
We shouldn't need executive orders or lawsuits or pushback because there are two genders. Science is very clear on this. There are men, there are women, and we want to protect that. I want to protect what is unique and special about being a woman, and they want to erase that, and we're not going to allow that to happen. I'm a mom. I have a daughter who plays sports, and frankly, I think every single parent in the country should be outraged at what this administration is doing.
Objective truth under attack here. God kind of...
He did. He was very clear. In the beginning, God created man and woman. I mean, it doesn't get much more simple than that.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders is making history as the first female governor in Arkansas history, while she's also the youngest governor in America. That hasn't stopped her from taking bold actions.
That includes changing state documents to now refer to those who give birth as a woman rather than a birth giver. Driver's licenses will no longer have X for gender. It's either male or female now. In her fight to protect children, Sanders signed a 2023 law making it easier to sue doctors who perform gender transitions on minors after the courts blocked a state law banning those procedures. Now she's exploring ways to potentially limit a child's smartphone use.
I think so many people, so many parents in particular, don't realize the dangers and the access that their kids have by putting a cell phone in their hand. They are opening up so many access points to their kids that if they knew about, they would never allow to happen.
These moves shouldn't surprise anyone, as Sanders made her perspective pretty clear when she gave the 2023 State of the Union response just a month after her being inaugurated.
The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal or crazy.
And she sees that philosophy giving her former boss a leg up in November.
I think it's one of the big reasons that you're seeing Donald Trump continue to climb in the polls, because every single thing this administration does is anti-American. It's anti-who we are.
So could Trump move forward into the White House again? A lot depends on how women vote. Democrats believe abortion in a post-Roe world will help them with that demographic. Sanders sees that view as too simplistic.
What does the Republican Party do on this issue? How do they appeal to the woman vote, the suburban vote, if you will, the suburban women vote on this?
Women are voting on the economy. They're voting on the border. They're voting on national security. They're voting on whether their schools are strong, their communities are safe. I'm a parent. I care about a lot of different issues. Don't single me down and file me down to one thing.
Speaking of the 2024 election, what about a woman like Sanders as Trump's VP?
Are you ruling it out, or are you keeping your options open?
Like, I love the job I have. I've been governor for a little over a year. Look forward to having this position for the next 6.5. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure Donald Trump wins in November, defeats Joe Biden, and gets him out of the White House.
In the meantime, Governor Sanders will focus on work here at the State House, and she's getting advice from a former governor who just happens to be her father.
You know, he is an amazing phone-a-friend, so he is happy to give advice when I ask, but it's rare that he will offer it without me asking. And so I try to tell him, Dad, if you see that I'm doing something I could do better or should do differently, call me. But he is very careful to let me pave my own path.
It's a path that's had many challenges, including a recent bout with thyroid cancer.
You're a fighter. You're now a cancer survivor. What was that experience like for you, and how did faith play a role, your Christian faith play a role in all of that?
You know, it's pretty terrifying, to be honest. I can sit here today and say, by the grace of God and amazing healthcare here in the state, I am 100% cancer-free, and I feel great, and I'm very, very thankful, but it certainly gives you a new perspective on life and reminds you of what's really important.
Like making a difference in people's lives, a lesson, she says, she learned from her parents.
When you're in the chair and you're making decisions, you can take a step back and say, does this help or hurt people in my state? If it helps them, go for it. If it doesn't, then walk away. And if you put it in simple terms like that, the decision making gets a lot easier. I absolutely love what I get to do.
David Brody, CBN News, in Pine Bluff, Arkansas.
Finally tonight, a big welcome to America's heroes in the City of Lights. 60 World War II veterans are in Paris this week to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day. The veterans, aged 96 to 107 years old, are taking part in parades, school visits, and an official June 6 commemoration of the historic landings. In Normandy, parachutists jumped from World War II-era planes to recreate the invasion. The 80th anniversary of D-Day is this Thursday. That's going to do it for tonight. We will see you tomorrow.